get started. Are we waiting for Renee and Buddy? Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started, and then when they join, they can join.
You don't have to have a quorum for a work session.
No.
Renee Hillman.
I mean, we're not making
You're not making any
decisions at the
action.
moment. Just a reminder for everyone to please, if you're speaking, to speak into your microphone. That way it can be picked up on the stream and for people who are calling in. This is a work session of the Board of Trustees. Today we are going to be talking about options for staff salary increases. So go ahead, Jason. Do you have anything you want to start with?
Yes.
And thank you.
All right, thank you. So before I get into the options that we're presenting, I do want to update you on, it's come up several times, the total cost to implement the full JER salary structure updated with the 4% kind of increase since their original. So sort of our back of napkin calculation today, it would be a total salary and benefits cost of $16,207,198, which is basically about $1.9 million more than what the approved fiscal 25 budget. So that would bring, it wouldn't put us in a deficit in 25, but it would leave a surplus of just $179,000. So that's the total cost in fiscal 25 to implement the entire structure.
And that's with no vacancies. So we budgeted for
Correct.
full staff, and this would reflect
Yes,
implementing the new structure and the changes for all those positions.
correct.
Okay.
Yep. And again, that it's not 100. I mean, it changes every day depending on, and I mean that is based upon salaries of staff who are no longer here, but the positions are still there. So I wouldn't. It's not going to be that exact dollar amount. And also, when running this, you do estimates of the benefits and the other non-salary pieces. But each individual, it's actually going to vary depending on what insurance plan they select and things like that. So, but yeah.
Can we do long-term projections? So I know you said that if right now we were to say, yes, let's just implement what JER recommended and move forward with that, we wouldn't be at a deficit for fiscal year 25. We wouldn't have that healthy, we'd have barely any surplus whatsoever. So,
Right.
I mean, plus or minus on that implementation. But our ability to maintain that new structure long-term, can we do any sort of projection on, what we would need our revenue to look like to maintain the implementation of this structure? I mean, because that's where we keep coming back to.
Right.
Like, we're not talking about a moment in time implementation. We are talking about how we are going to maintain this over the course of the coming years. And so it would be helpful for us as we're trying to make decisions about this, if we could know what, year 2, year 3, year 4, I'm assuming by year 5 we would have done another update to keep us in line with market.
Yeah.
To know what that would look like and whether it's unlikely that we would have a revenue bump to sustain that. So then we would have to really seriously start cutting back. I mean, that was, right, we've been having this discussion for 2+ months now. And so, and I feel like these are some key data points we're going to need as we get through our decision-making process for beyond just salaries itself.
Yeah. We absolutely can project, but we need to arrive at assumptions, and I think it's something that the board really, because I mean, when you look at this is really like long-term
Yes.
fiscal planning, and that's sort of one, in terms of sort of like the board's fiscal role, that's sort of a key piece of it. So it's like, what assumptions should we be working on? And we have to, for revenue increases, because we can only make assumptions. We can only make assumptions on, you know, what figure should we arrive at? You know, is it 3% for operations every year are going to grow, or what? So, I mean, we can certainly make those. They will be, the nature of projections are they are a guess. They are a guess based on a certain set of assumptions. And then the piece that we know we have talked about is how much do we want to set aside for capital every year. So all of those things, I think we need to look at almost first before we can.
Well,
Would you, Julie, I mean, I don't want to.
as a starting point, could we start with projections, assuming status quo for everything else? Like, so we're not going to make significant capital improvements beyond what we normally do. We're not, you know, building buildings or doing things like
Right.
that. And so that we can see what it would look like long-term if we did nothing. You see what I'm saying? Like, so we're not going to, you know, cut 25% off our operating expenses and make an assumption that we're doing
Right.
that and then see what it looks like. I'm talking about seeing what it looks like. Here's what our operations normally are. Here's historically and what we can assume it'll be for the next 4 years based on likely inflation. I mean, yes, we understand it's just a guess, but I think in terms of planning for us, knowing what the baseline is so that we can see what the impact will be and what we're looking at in terms of, oh, we're going to be off of the revenue by 15%. So we've got to cut 15% of expenses or something. Like, so I understand we need to give you some direction on what to look at for those types of projections, and I think we can do that, but I think it would be helpful to have that information as we go into the decision-making process. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to speak for everyone, so if someone else has a different idea of how that should work, please speak up, but so I guess in order to do that, what kind of assumptions and decisions would you need, or guidance from the board would you need to do those types of projections for us?
I mean, I think, again, what to use as a projection of revenue, annual revenue increase projection, and annual expense increase projection. And obviously, it's something we talk about. It's not,
Right.
but I mean, I almost feel like the board has to, and I'm actually speaking in how I've seen this happen in other organizations that I've been a part of. The board actually, like, takes motion to say, use these assumptions in forward. And then the staff does the work doing that. But I mean, in many ways, kind of like how you pass a preliminary tax rate that we use to budget.
But aren't you supplying those, like when we're presented a budget?
Yeah.
You supply the assumption for the revenues.
Yes.
Are you asking us to?
No,
come up
sorry,
with,
I don't. I want to. I'm not saying you just come to me with it. I say we arrive at it together,
Okay.
but it does need to be
All right.
formally stated, so there's a record of what we're using and that we're all in agreement.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, sorry, that kind of derailed. Go ahead.
One other thing, I think it's important, you know, we've looked at the salary study a while ago,
Yeah.
right? And I think what we've kind of done is just focused on the bottom dollar number of
Yeah.
that study. And for me, it would be better to kind of, I'd like to personally kind of go back through that study and maybe make some slight modifications, because I don't believe, and you have to remind me here because it's been a little bit since we went over this. Was there any type of years of service seniority component of the study? So if, let's say the range is below market, we move the range up, but then the employee within the range moves based on seniority, right? So we place them in the range based on seniority.
That's one of the two factors. It was, yeah, but, and I should actually jump in here and say they are going to be here next month to talk to you all.
Okay.
So, and represent
Okay.
everything, so, and answer questions.
Perfect.
So.
You read my mind.
Okay.
So to answer your question, JER looked at where people are in terms of seniority in our organization.
Okay.
But they also looked at compa ratio. So if someone came in at a higher level based on the position, like if you are, I honestly, my mind is blank, but let's say the staff learning coordinator and the staff learning coordinator had 10 years of experience and didn't come in at the entry level, and they were maybe on the, because it was by steps, they were on the 5th step, then they looked to see where that would be in the new salary range and
Right.
place them there. So they did both to see what was best for the employee, and that's the number that we went with.
Okay. The only challenge that I have at the moment with any kind of options that are presented is across the board, just a percentage increase from where people currently are. And I don't know that that's actually accomplishing what we're really looking for in the end, right? Is looking at where individuals should be placed and placing them in the proper spot. I feel much more comfortable going that approach and getting people where they need to be, as opposed to just here's 5% for everybody and we move on. So for me, next month sounds like that will be a healthy discussion, at least to get me to where I think we need to be at.
So anything else on that?
Sorry, I kind of
No,
derailed you from what you were actually.
It's a work session. This is what these are for.
Hey, Jason,
Yeah.
I did have a question. We have quite a few openings,
Mhm.
and how many is that?
I don't know specific opening, but we're currently at about 180 FTE and budgeted for about 208. So
Okay, and so are some of those positions such that they're being eliminated, or are they just waiting to be filled?
no, they're all still in the budget. So anything that's going to be eliminated has been eliminated from the budget. Now, in the FY25 budget, knowing that we have one large location closed for the first part of the year, we are keeping branch positions vacant until January because we have staff from that other location to fill in. So that's the only sort of anomaly within that.
But let me clarify that. They are branch positions that have been vacant,
Yeah.
not any of the new
Yes,
vacancies
sorry.
that we've started seeing within this new fiscal year.
Right.
We are starting to fill those positions, or at least they're being posted, and we're hoping to fill all of the positions.
Okay, because that's a component that we need to look at based upon the prior expense ratios that we've been looking at.
Right, and that is a piece of the FY25 budget that we can't forget, that the staff budget there is a chunk of that is not full staff, and in
FY26,
we'll have all of our buildings open, they all have to be fully staffed, so
Right.
it will jump up.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Jason and Tiffany, this is Renee. I have a question for both of you. Has any thought been given to the new Department of Labor rule that went into effect, assuming July 1st, and then the one that's coming for January 1st with the increase in exempt salaries?
Yes, so it's a phase-in, as you mentioned. So part of it, the first phase started July 1. We didn't have to make any adjustments there. Everyone that is exempt met the salary threshold. The January piece, there were 7. We would have 7 staff that we will need to adjust. Or make decision. We'll look at it at a case-by-case basis, whether they remain exempt and salaries get adjusted or they're made non-exempt. It just depends on the nature of the position.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. So what you asked us to do is to come back with some options that related to the JER salary study, but weren't full implementation, but looked at, in particular, focusing on bringing the people at the lower ends of each grade up to minimum, particularly the ones that were below what the minimum for their grade would be in the new structure. So we did that. I presented 3 options. the way to do that is really to divide each salary grade into quartile, or I guess they're not quartiles, but into segments based upon where they fall in relationship to minimum, mid, and max. And so the first option does divide it into quartiles, and we have about 10% of staff below their new minimum. Or I'm sorry, not 10% of staff. We have about 58% of staff that would be below their new minimum if the JER salary structure was implemented. About 32% of staff would be above minimum, at or above minimum, but below midpoint. And then 10% are currently midpoint or above, but below maximum. And no one would be above maximum currently. The second option divides it into 6 segments. So below minimum, but then at minimum or above, but below the first quartile of the segment. There's 22%. What?
Continue.
It's hard to follow. I know.
Very clear.
Yeah, so.
It's more, just think of it's divided up, and the chart's there. But options 2 and 3 divide into 6 segments. For the first option that divides into 4, what's being proposed would be a 10% increase for folks who are below minimum, a 5% increase for minimum or above, but below midpoint, and then a 3% for folks who are at or above midpoint, but below maximum. There wasn't a lot we could do. And we've talked about this, the downside of this approach is you get salary compression. It's going to happen. There's no way that it won't happen. I tried other percentages for that first one. If you go any higher than 10%, there's people in it that actually jump over the next group. So just dividing it into 4 sections was a lot harder. You get more nuance if you divide it into the 6 sections. So options 2 and 3 are exactly the same, except for the amount that is going to folks who are below minimum. Option 2, that would be 10% again, and then sort of the next group would be 7%, then 5, then 3. Option 3 is exactly the same, except that first group is 15% instead of 10%. That brings the most people who are currently below minimum up to or above minimum. It goes from 142 employees to only is still a lot, but 67 employees. And then that first group goes from 55 to 98 people. And so the only 2 differences there is obviously the cost. So the second set that we just provided with you now actually shows the impact of these on the budget itself. So the first page is the currently approved fiscal 25 budget that did have a 7% across the board built in to it. Then, the second page shows what would happen if option 1 was implemented, and you'll see it actually is less. It turns out being less of a salary spend. So I think we can all say that the problems with compression and the fact that it's actually lower, we probably don't want to do that one. Option 2 is honestly right about the same. If you look at the salaries and benefits, it is $14,300,836, where the approved budget is $14,312,910. So it's literally a few $1,000s off. And then option 3, and that's the one that has the 15% increase for people below minimum. That one, the total salaries and benefits would be $14,536,764. So really about a $200,000 difference. Our overall general fund total expenditures would go from $22,782,000 to $23 million. And the surplus would be reduced from 2,073,000 to 1,849,000. That's the information. I will leave it to you.
So for option 2 and 3, can you explain how the numbers for after the increase work for everyone except for below minimum? Because it looks like the number of employees that are in that group after the pay increase goes up.
No, really?
Yeah.
It went from 55 to 62, 25 to 45, 24 to 30, 0 to 6. Are those numbers backwards?
They might be.
I mean, I could be reading the chart wrong.
No, I think because so many of them were below minimum. I mean, I think if you add them up, I'm sure I checked this.
I mean, I could be wrong.
Yeah, 246, they're the same. It's because so many of them move out of being below minimum and are,
Or in the other segments then.
they're in the other segments then.
Okay.
Yeah,
Got it.
which, I
So
mean,
we
again,
have-
that was the really intended purpose of this exercise, was to focus on getting as many people to minimum or above as possible.
So I guess I want to have a discussion about what the consequences of doing this are instead of full implementation of the salary study results.
I mean, I mean, the only thing that is truly going to be equitable for everyone in the organization is full implementation of the salary study results. It puts every single person where they should be relative to their experience. So that's the consequences.
I mean, I would agree
choose
with
that
what
one.
Jason said, because
Which we don't have. Right.
I've been part of the HR team that's been working on this for a long time, and the whole reason we did it in the first place was because we knew our staff were underpaid, and we knew that we needed a new system, and we knew we needed a study. The study was a really deep study. They have a lot of information, a lot of data points, and they came back, and we were not surprised. I mean, if anything, I would say we were less surprised and even more disappointed that we were that far behind where we needed to be. And I think, I mean, now we're on the second fiscal year that we have not done this, and I think anything less than actually adopting the salary structure and putting people where they need to be is not even a Band-Aid at this point. And I would have a hard time facing staff.
So are there challenges to, if we picked one of these options, and then, let's say, a year from now, we're ready, everything's in place, we have the money, and we do a full salary study implementation, is doing some piecemeal salary type increase, I mean, we did one last year too, going to make it more challenging to implement the results of the salary study later on down the line?
I think the one thing I want to point out is the way this is done, the people that are getting hurt the most are the people that have been here the longest. They are not seeing the money that they should be earning, but yet they've put in year after year after year of service. And we're getting other employees that are getting closer and closer and closer to what they're currently earning. And they're the same ones that have stuck it out through everything, including the pandemic.
Yep.
And on the front lines. So for me, I think it's great we get everybody to the minimum where they need to be. Absolutely, 100% we need to do that. I would not say anything differently, but I don't want staff who've been here for any number of years to now take the brunt of, well, you value me less, even though I've been here longer. And I'm also the one that's helping train the other staff, but yet I'm valued less now. And that, to me, that's that's the biggest worry, because now we're asking them to wait another year. So it means they now know that for 2 years, that they have gone through all of the turmoil that they've gone through, and for 2 years, they have continued to be underpaid at the level that they are. And when we talk about morale, when we talk about how staff are feeling, to me, this is what helps lower that. So,
Go ahead.
But to implement the full salary study, that's not one of the options that's currently presented, correct? That's not in this pamphlet.
It is not.
That's what would be the 1.9 million,
Yeah.
only leave the 175,000 in
Correct.
surplus. And I think probably the other discussion it leads into is, there's been discussions about the board about what to maybe have some benchmarks of how much do we want to see in capital reserves.
Right.
You know, obviously planning forward to say we've got 4.2 million because of the projects that we already planned. We wouldn't have to do that next year. So
Right.
I think some planning about what the board wants to see for future capital reserves, and if there's some benchmark, and planning for that, and then also thinking about big picture of, yeah, do you piecemeal it, or do you rip off the Band-Aid and just do it all? And is that fiscally responsible? And do we have enough things for the future in terms of stuff that comes up? Because stuff always comes up. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think we all know that it's going to compound. Obviously,
Right.
there would be an increase based on cost of living, hopefully, every year, whatever that looks like. But also, our benefits are going to continue to rise in expense, because that's not getting cheaper. We've been relatively lucky for a couple of years, but that doesn't look like it might be our future. So, and it also compounds because we have loggers, we have retirement and so I think the point I'm trying to make is something just has to be figured out, because we're either not going to pay our employees what they should get paid, and they'll continue to be as upset, which I get it.
Rightfully so. Yeah.
So, what I guess, that's all I'm going to say.
Oh.
Any change that we would make, would that be retroactive to the beginning of the fiscal year?
No, and in fact, we didn't, I mean, when we budgeted not to do the increases August 1 anyway. I mean, we don't do them at the beginning of the fiscal year.
Oh, okay, so any increase, if we were to give one prior, for the next fiscal year, would begin on August 1st?
That's what
Normally.
happened last year, and it's what we budgeted for this year. So,
Okay,
yes.
all right, so.
September 1st. September 1st?
I think that was the first pay period.
Okay. No, I thought it was August. What did we do? First pay period in.
Okay,
It
it's
was
not
some
July
other month
1.
other than July.
Not
Got
July
it.
1. There we go.
Got it, okay.
It's the fourth pay period, it's August.
August. Okay.
So if we make any modification, any of these options that we choose, or an option that's not listed here, would take effect at the same time. If we go past that date and we make a modification, are we retroactively going to when the date when people normally would get their increase?
No.
Okay,
Administratively, that's
Yeah.
a nightmare as far as trying to figure that out. We've got hourly employees, et cetera.
Yeah.
That's,
okay.
Last year was the first year that we
Yeah.
did that, picked that date. Otherwise, it was happening on anniversary dates or, anniversary dates.
fair.
Sorry.
All over the place, yeah.
Okay.
And I guess I should clarify for everyone, we're discussing options tonight. We are not voting on salary increases till next meeting, so,
Well,
um,
I mean, yes, nothing is taking effect, but we would like to come out of here with clear direction on
Right.
what budget to prepare. We would bring forward an amended budget
yes.
that reflects the salary, yeah.
The options that you've listed include increases to the positions that are vacant, correct?
Increases to the positions.
We have 28 positions that are currently vacant. Those positions are budgeted. We budgeted an amount for those positions
Right.
currently, right?
We did not make increases to that.
Yeah.
So the positions that are going to be filled as of January 1, or
Okay.
beginning January 1, those
Okay.
were not increased.
So if we make this if we make a modification, would we then have to do another budget amendment in whenever we hire those positions or whatever, or, I mean, how's that gonna work? You're potentially gonna be potentially over budget in salaries, but I don't see that happening because we never are.
That is true. That's why.
'Cause you're never
I-
full.
I did not, I didn't
Yeah.
make that an issue because as far as timing and getting the people hired, if it begins January, it's going to take some time. And then we do have the vacancies, it pretty much levels out.
Do we have a report that shows the amount of time that the positions have been vacant? Do we know that?
Probably.
We do, we can pull the information, but we don't have it with us tonight, but we can bring it.
Do we have a guesstimate of how long those positions have been open?
I can't
Posted.
give a guesstimate because they're all different positions in different departments, different
Sure.
branches, so.
Okay.
When you're asking for direction, Jason, I mean, in terms of which options to bring back to the next meeting, that's when we take action?
Yes.
I mean, I would assume there would we kind of have three options here. There would be three different options. There'd be discussion and a vote between the board. I would suggest that you bring back the full implementation as well as one of the options.
That would be my suggestion too.
Okay, I don't know that that could be ready for next meeting though, because I think that would require, I mean, right?
We would just need the budget amount, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
That's all
Yeah,
we're
I
doing.
don't,
Okay.
I think that's fine.
Okay.
We have the information, so.
I mean, we know it was 1.9 million, and we know some of the general numbers of what it would do to the budget, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just, that was calculated in a method very different than the other three options that were more based upon today's employees versus what I'm bringing forward is their own, what was presented in '24 with 4% added onto it.
So are you suggesting that we're considering, or you are considering the option of a full implementation for fiscal '25, as in relatively immediate, to make that budget adjustment as opposed to fiscal '26, without having a plan for how that's going to be funded in the future?
Well, I think it goes back to what I was mentioning before, which is we need to have a full understanding of what the cost to the district is of full implementation.
Right.
Because we can't make any concrete decisions until we see the price tag, and then we know, looking forward for the next 4 or 5 years, you know, what we think is going to happen with other types of expenses, what we think is going to happen with our revenue, so that, I mean, in a way, it's almost a catch-22, because it's,
Yep.
we need all these pieces of information, they all work together, and we can't just rely on one piece of information to make the decision. But I think as a baseline, we just need to know how much it's gonna cost so that we can make some other decisions. Because to Nevada's point, you know, maybe we had planned X big project for 2 years from now, but maybe we could put that off for a little bit, so we'd leave less in our capital fund than we thought. I mean, there's things that we can do as we're planning to help prepare in case there is a revenue shortage or there is a spike in some type of expense or something like that. But until we know what the number is, we're just guessing and crossing our fingers, which is not a good way
Yeah, I agree.
to be making decisions. So,
Yep.
I was concerned because the $16 million figure this is the first time I've heard of it. So that's additionally concerning to me. Because we haven't had a discussion as far as the future, you know, possibility of an operating levy increase proposed to the public and things of that nature, so.
I mean, that's part,
It's part of the conversation, but it's not.
Exactly.
It's an issue with me because it's making an operating expense decision before funding is actually secured.
Exactly. That was going to be my point. You know, I mean, what other sources of revenue can we look at other than the tax rate and the grants that we're being given? I mean, one of the things that I looked at in the budget for last year was, or several years ago, I'm not sure when, the fines were eliminated, and that's several $100,000 from what I understand, correct?
It was at that point, it wouldn't be now, but
You know, I mean, why are we getting rid of source of revenue? I understand that that's the trend across the country is forgiveness, but it's a cost. If we don't have books and you have to go out and buy a new book because someone didn't return the old book, that's a cost that's considered here. I mean, so why was that done anyway?
well, actually, I want to clarify. If people don't return the book, they're still charged for it.
Okay,
So it's only the punitive late fine, the 10 cents, that it disproportionately affects the people that can't pay it. But those were trending down, like it would be much less than several $100,000 now because ebooks again, they automatically return, so they can't be late.
okay.
But yeah, so that is definitely a misunderstanding a lot of people have. We absolutely still charge people if they don't return the book.
Okay. Just late fees.
Just the punitive late fee that study after study after study has shown don't have any effect on whether people bring books back on time or not because they're so low.
I say I wasn't part of the
Yeah.
discussion, so I was wondering why that was
Yeah,
done. Okay.
yeah. At this point, there's not a lot of libraries that charge late fees
I
anymore.
did that research and
Yeah.
found that out.
Yeah, and I am not suggesting that we just shut our eyes and cross our fingers and implement the salary structure without a
Yeah.
plan for making sure that we have revenue in place to sustain that long-term. But I think as a starting point, we need to understand what the impact on the budget's going to be.
I understand.
Just from salaries and benefits from implementing the structure. And, I mean, from my perspective, using fiscal year '25 as the starting point with the positions we have, with the people we have, with all the knowns that we have right now, and seeing what that looks like is a good place to start.
I agree.
I still think everyone's still missing the point that we still need to fund these things. You know, and that needs to be part of our discussion here. And whether that means that someone has to bite the bullet and say, we're gonna have a tax increase here. That's what we need to do. I mean, quite frankly, Jason and the board, the officers did quite a bit of work to put this plan together about closing schools, which
Libraries.
created
Libraries, not schools.
Library, I mean, yeah, excuse me. And created a nuclear bomb. And, but it brought to our attention that there is a severe revenue problem in this library district. And we've kind of closed our eyes to that in jumping to the next step of trying to make our employees happy, which is a laudable goal. But we still have to consider those funding sources. And unless someone knows of any other source of income that the board hasn't, or the officers haven't presented us with, I think we might have to start talking about asking for a tax increase.
Yeah, and I think that is another thing that we're looking at, and I will have somebody come to talk to the board about that. I was actually hoping for today, but he wasn't available. But yes, I mean, that has to be an option that you have available to you.
In fiscal 2024, we had Spencer closed for how long?
A little less than 6 months, 5.
Okay. But we opened up Mid Rivers.
Yeah.
Staff moved from Spencer to Mid Rivers, right?
They moved throughout the
But-
district, but some moved.
Okay,
But, yeah.
rotated throughout the district. On average, last year, you're not gonna have these numbers, but I'm gonna
I know,
ask the
like,
question
okay.
anyway. On average, last year, we probably are around 28, again, vacant positions, kind of just throughout it ebbs and flows, sure, as positions hired, people move on, sure, it ebbs and flows, but we'll say roughly 28 positions, maybe, were open last year, in 2024 fiscal year? Maybe? Okay.
Sure.
I mean, at a
So-
time or total, like,
Like
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
where we're currently at right now.
Okay, yeah.
Right, that's what, isn't that what we said? We're currently at 28 roughly
Roughly
open
FTE.
positions.
Well, FTE.
FTE.
F,
So it might be more than actual,
okay,
because they're not all full-time.
Fair.
Actually, most aren't full-time.
okay.
So,
So of those FTEs that are open, when I look at the budgeted numbers that came in for the end of the year, unaudited, grant you, we spent 86% of our personnel budget. That was because of,
because of vacancies. I mean, yeah.
okay, solely because of vacancies.
I mean,
not
that's-
because of the Middendorf Cordell closing, because that really didn't close until
No.
right before the end of the year. And that's still, again, they're cycling through, those employees are still
the
working.
closings allowed for some of the vacancies to maybe persist longer than they otherwise would have.
Sure.
But yes, I mean, I've never seen a personnel budget ever be 100% expended.
Amen.
You know,
Thank
that-
you, Jason. I'm
Well, I
so
mean-
glad you got to where I'm headed.
Yeah, there's always going to be people leave and people start, and
Absolutely.
there's always a gap in between. So unless it's
Absolutely.
an organization with 10 people that they never leave, it's always going to be underspent.
Correct. I couldn't agree more. So, but come January, we're going to still have Mid Rivers,
Yes.
and we're going
Well-
to have the other libraries open. Is that correct?
We're not going to, we may or may not have Mid Rivers.
Okay.
The lease is through January.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. All right. Thank you.
But yes, all the other ones
But
will
yes,
be
the
open.
other ones.
Yeah. Thanks.
I mean, construction, so we hope. But
I feel like a lawyer building a case.
boy, you're literally the only non-lawyer up there.
I know.
so.
I know. Maybe that's what it is. I'm surrounded by greatness.
Right. So of option 2 and option 3, which of the two, I guess, lessens the impact of wage compression, or are they equivalent in that regard?
Well, option 2 would lessen it somewhat because it's giving a group 10%, and the next group up is getting 7% versus 15%, and the next group is getting 7%. So that would lessen the impact of wage compression. And it would basically hit our salary budget almost exactly as was already approved. So honestly, would probably not require much of any budget amendment at all.
Well, I have a question. So on this, on the options where it says total percent change, that's total percent change,
From,
it's a 7% increase on the salary budget, so.
it's
option-
not, it's a total percent change from,
Just on salaries.
yes, and not with that 7% that's in fiscal '25. It's from, as if that 7% didn't exist. So from '23, or '24.
But in a sense, on option 2, there's really not a lot of change with regard to the budget.
No,
If you go to option 3, it's a 200 and some $1,000 change.
correct.
Okay.
But none of those are that significant of a change. I mean, even the $200,000.
When we were going through the budget in June, I was asking some questions related to different expenditure or expense counts. And I think there was, my memory's already gone from last month. I think there was some discussion that there were items we didn't spend because of the work being done here and at other libraries that we didn't spend certain things that we would have, correct? Maybe?
Probably, well, I mean, just off the top of my head, Summer Challenge expenses would have been less, right, with one fewer branch? Okay, because it just got, okay, dispersed, it, okay.
Still assuming that we have the same number of
people we're serving, yeah.
Okay. I'm not
I mean,
recalling.
we're still
off the
mowing the
top of my-
lawn,
Yeah,
and, you know,
yeah,
and
yeah.
stuff like that.
I just thought that there was some consolidation of stuff that we didn't spend, and I thought some of that was related to, okay.
We did have decreased, operating costs a bit as far as whether it's waste management, some of the utilities and things of that nature. So some of those were cut, but they weren't eliminated.
I haven't gone, well, I will go back, hold on. Okay. I was gonna ask the question, but I know the answer now, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Have we ever hit 100% of our expenditures, for our just operations of libraries? Since 2020, the answer appears to be no.
You mean?
Which is a great job by library staff to
Right.
not overspend what you've been allocated for your budget. So, I mean, that's a good thing. Okay.
Do you mean in terms of all of the operating?
Well, I just meant under like other operations
okay.
or,
Got it.
yeah. I mean, library materials is probably is the closest to 100,
Consistent,
and
yes.
rightfully so, because it's also pretty stable in terms of we know what that amount is, for the most part, yeah, I guess, right?
Yeah, materials differs because of I believe Carol can confirm, that, our fiscal year versus how they order and receive and things of that nature. Because they
Got it.
track that very closely.
Got it.
So materials is normally right on.
Mhm.
Human resources, salaries and benefits, we have the vacancies. We are normally right on as far as rent. Tend to come close to as far as utilities. When you look at grounds, maintenance, et cetera, the snow removal is normally the biggest guess, so that's
Yeah.
what's different there. We're normally right on as far as postage and some of the other line items, but yes, they've done a great job as far as managing some of those costs.
Certainly, and I think the technology was one that was over, but we also received a grant, so that offset.
Right.
So, yeah.
And we've also had the issue of, our teams have focused on some of the projects, so a lot of the, amounts that have been expended are in the project area, and that's where their time has been spent. And, it's taken away from some of the expenditures and the individual operational lines.
I have a question. I know we maybe talked about it before, but when we get all of our revenues, are they all invested in CDs then of varying maturity, or what do we do with all our revenue when it comes in?
It's in your packet
So-
every month, Nevada.
No, I know, but I want to hear it from Julie.
So we currently have about, I'd say, 6.5 months before we receive our funding in mid-January, correct? So we'll use probably in 12, with our capital expenditures, we'll probably use 12 or 13 million as far as operating cash
Okay.
until we receive that. So, so therefore, a portion of what you're seeing is in the cash account because we consume a couple million a month. So
Right.
what is left over, yes, it is put into CDs. There are other conservative investments that can be made as well for operating, purposes. But right now, and for really the past year, almost year and a half, the CD interest has been tremendous. So I've been, staggering it using
Is there a
That tool.
is there a requirement in terms of how how the library invests its funds? Do we have to be in?
So we have an investment policy, but yes, as far as being a governmental entity, we can't invest in, stocks, bonds, things of that nature. That's why our foundation has that endowment. So we have to stay liquid because we can't put anything at risk because it's public dollars, basically.
Okay.
No Bitcoin.
Correct.
Last.
No big.
No Bitcoin.
No, please, no. Oh, gosh.
Okay, thanks.
So,
No, go ahead.
Matthew was talking about the Mid-River branch and how long it went. I was looking at the statement of expenditure by location. I didn't see that branch mentioned here. I'm just trying to find out how much will come off the budget if we don't renew at
So,
Mid-River.
so Mid Rivers is part of Central Services right now, just because we didn't budget for it. It's like,
Okay.
at that time. So probably a total of 40,000
So not
for the
much.
year.
Not much. I mean, the lease
No.
is very reasonable.
It is very reasonable.
All right, thanks.
So last year, fiscal year 2024, we ended the year, and I'm going to take out the state grant, the aid and state grant of $1 million, because I don't want to include that in the
Yeah.
general numbers here. But our tax revenue was 23.4 million. And our total expenditures from the operating side was 20.1 million. So we had a $3.3 million surplus from operating expenditures to our taxing revenue only. Now, there's other things that go into the revenue, and there's other things. And then obviously capital plays a role as well in that total number. But I just wanted to stress and kind of make a point that we talk about where's money coming from, where's revenues coming from, and what makes me able to think about implementing the full salary study and still be able to sleep at night is seeing numbers, and it's not just last year. There's other years prior that we're looking at where it's similar in nature. Makes me see that I think we have the ability to implement it without looking for another revenue source at the time. So that's where my head is at in that discussion, and why I'd like to see that as an option.
So for the past 2 years, though, if you notice, it's like our actual was, well, our budget as far as our salaries and benefits has been quite a bit higher. So we truly are short. Even now, we're short 3 full-time positions that aren't normally turnover positions, whether it's our director of technology services, we've got a training coordinator, we've got a director of branch services. So those are 3 full-time positions. So just that as a given, they do need to be filled. It's not like those are optional.
Sure.
We are under as far as salaries and benefits. So given the status quo, it's like we are missing a significant amount, and that's without seeing an increase even with those particular positions to the new structure. So I don't think that the result of fiscal /24 in particular is indicative of what we're looking at with a full salary structure implementation come fiscal /26.
Okay.
Having seen our issue with filling positions, the Spencer closure, MK's closure, not filling major full-time positions, and then looking at, yes, we're going to adjust, but we also have to take in consideration, yes, inflation, if we need to give another increase, and not having additional income Because right now, we won't see it in this year, but next year, as far as the tax freeze, as far as, seniors with that property tax freeze, things of that nature, not sure what's going to happen in the future as far as our, our revenues, considering we're 95% property tax funded. That is concerning to me, and let's
Yeah.
face it.
It could be worse. You could be sales tax.
It could.
Nice.
We don't have sales tax, but again, it's like, this is non-reassessment year, but last
Right.
time, it's like, the public was not happy with the way that personal property was valued. That
Certainly.
was legislation that was not, wasn't passed this past time around, but that was, our legislature was having difficulties. So, again, if, the method of valuation is going to come up, we'll see that again. It will become an issue again. So those types of things concern me because we don't have any additional revenue streams.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, but I'm looking back, 3-4 years, and we hover around 90% actual versus budgeted in salary and benefits. So I totally understand that there are positions that are vacant that we need to fill. I totally get that, but I almost feel like, I'm not taking 2024 as kind of like in a vacuum and looking at it only. I mean, I'm kind of going back multiple years, and almost until we get back to 2020 is the only time where we're actually really close to our budgeted amount and our actual salaries. But since then, we've been about 10% lower every
Well,
year.
and I was actually just going to point that out, that we really do have to go back that far because that was 21 was the pandemic, and we were on a hiring freeze. So really, it's like you have to kind of go back to 20 and earlier is the last time we were normal. That we hadn't, because we had cut hours, we had gone on a hiring freeze. I mean, that's why the chart shows a significant drop at that time. So
Have we been in when was the hiring freeze over?
during COVID, but then it kind of, one just led right to the next thing. So 25 and 24, because of vacancies and closures, there was kind of, 22 was maybe sort of the in-between year, but then 21, there was a hiring freeze.
But I thought the closures.
Well,
So the closures, we didn't fill any positions that were open. Is that what we're getting at? Like, because of the closures of the libraries, any positions that were vacant, we did not fill, right? Or we've trying to fill positions, but we're just not getting
Little bit of both.
candidates. And yeah, okay,
Both,
fair
yeah.
enough. All right.
yeah, I mean, really, it's sort of it's not just us, it's the post-COVID workplace hiring issues.
Certainly,
So,
certainly.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, the intention is to
Which may
have an
not ever-
attractive package as far as people wanting to work here. And that's what we're
Absolutely.
working
Yep.
towards. So, once you do that, we should have, I would think and hope that we'd have less difficulty filling those positions. So that would be
Totally
a
agree.
difference from,
Yep.
Yeah.
the past few years.
Yep, totally agree. Thank you.
So, I mean, I would like to suggest that we let Jason know what type of information we're looking for, and perhaps in between now and our August meeting, we have another session to talk in detail about implementing the full structure, but also considering other things like capital, the stuff we have to keep in emergency reserves, and that all the things that work together
Yeah.
to dictate our solvency and our financial stability. So, but I mean, I agree with Matthew. I mean, I said it before. I think it's good for us to see an option with the full implementation, because while I don't like the option of doing 0, I also dislike even more the option of doing something that is not going to be the best financial or staff morale affecting decision. So we're running up close to the start of our regular meeting, so does anyone have anything else to add?
Thank you.
All right. So Jason, I'll follow up with you.
Okay.
And the other trustees about that. We will take a 5-minute break and then come back for the regular meeting.